Marcus Williams looked at his watch as he packed up his office. It was already 9:30 p.m., much later than he had planned. The 45-year-old FBI regional director had spent the entire day reviewing files about hate crimes in Chicago. His desk was covered with photos, reports, and witness statements. Each case made his heart heavy. As one of the few African-American FBI directors in the country, Marcus felt a special responsibility to solve these crimes. He picked up his phone and called his wife, Sarah. "Hey, honey, I'm finally leaving the office," he said with a tired voice. Sarah had been married to Marcus for 20 years. She knew his job was demanding, but she still worried when he worked so late. "The kids already ate dinner," Sarah told him, "but I saved you a plate. Drive safe, Marcus. I love you." "I love you too." "Tell Tommy and Lisa I'll see them in the morning," Marcus replied before hanging up. Marcus grabbed his black leather briefcase and walked toward the elevator. The FBI building was almost empty. Only security guards and a few night shift workers remained. His footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway. He had been working at this building for 8 years, ever since he became the regional director. It was a job he had dreamed about since joining the FBI 15 years ago. The parking garage was dark and cold. Marcus's black sedan sat alone in his reserved spot. He unlocked the car and threw his briefcase in the back seat. The engine started smoothly, and he drove out of the garage into the Chicago night. The city streets were busy with traffic, even at this late hour. Marcus loved Chicago, but lately, the hate crimes were making him see his city differently. As he drove through downtown, Marcus thought about his family. His son Tommy was 16 and played basketball at his high school. His daughter Lisa was 14 and loved to read books. Both kids were smart and had big dreams. Marcus wanted to make sure they grew up in a world where their skin color would not hold them back. That's why cases like the ones on his desk mattered so much to him. The drive from downtown to his suburban neighborhood usually took 30 minutes. Marcus lived in Riverside, a quiet area with tree-lined streets and nice houses. He and Sarah had moved there when the kids were small. It was the kind of neighborhood where people knew each other and kids could play outside safely. As Marcus drove, he listened to smooth jazz on the radio. The music helped him relax after long days at work. He rolled down his window slightly to let in some fresh air. The night was warm for October, and the stars were visible in the clear sky. For a moment, Marcus forgot about the stress of his job and just enjoyed the peaceful drive. He took his usual route home, turning onto Maple Street. This was his favorite part of the drive. The street had beautiful old oak trees that formed a natural tunnel over the road. During the day, sunlight filtered through the leaves. At night, the street lamps created interesting shadows on the pavement. Marcus slowed down as he approached the stop sign at the intersection of Maple and Oak Street. This was a quiet residential area where nothing exciting ever happened. Families lived here for decades. Children rode their bikes on these streets. It was the kind of place where the biggest news was usually about someone's new garden or a lost cat. As Marcus stopped at the sign, he noticed headlights behind him. A car had been following him for the last few blocks, but he hadn't paid much attention. Now the headlights seemed brighter and closer. Marcus looked in his rearview mirror and saw it was a police patrol car. The white car with blue stripes was sitting right behind him. Marcus felt a familiar feeling in his stomach. It was the same feeling he had experienced many times throughout his life. Even though he was a successful FBI director, even though he carried a badge and a gun, even though he had dedicated his life to law enforcement, he still felt nervous when police cars appeared behind him. This feeling had started when Marcus was just a teenager. His father had given him the talk that many African-American parents give their children. "Always keep your hands visible," his father had said. "Never make sudden movements. Always be polite and respectful, even if the officer is not." Marcus had hoped his own children would never need this talk, but he had already started preparing what he would say to Tommy. The police car's red and blue lights suddenly turned on. The flashing lights lit up the quiet street like a Christmas tree. Marcus's heart began to beat faster. He carefully pulled his car to the side of the road, making sure to use his turn signal and move slowly. He had done this before, many times, over the years. Marcus put the car in park and turned off the engine. He placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. This was the position his father had taught him 30 years ago. It was the same position he had taught his son Tommy just last year. The flashing lights from the police car painted red and blue patterns on his dashboard. Through his side mirror, Marcus watched as the police officer got out of his patrol car. The officer was a white man, probably in his 40s, with a thick build and a serious expression. He walked slowly toward Marcus's car, his hand resting on his service weapon. This made Marcus even more nervous. The officer's flashlight beam cut through the darkness as he approached the driver's side window. Marcus could see the man's face now. He had cold eyes and a hard expression. Something about the way the officer moved made Marcus feel like this was not going to be a routine traffic stop. Marcus had handled dangerous situations before. He had arrested criminals, investigated major cases, and faced armed suspects. But sitting in his car with a police officer approaching felt different. In those other situations, he had been in control. He had backup nearby. He had his FBI credentials clearly displayed. Tonight he was just another black man being pulled over on a quiet street. The officer reached Marcus's window and tapped on the glass with his flashlight. The sound was sharp and demanding. Marcus rolled down his window slowly, keeping his hands visible at all times. The cool night air rushed into the car, carrying with it the tension of what was about to unfold. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said in a calm, respectful voice. He had learned long ago that the tone of voice could make a big difference in these situations. "Is there a problem?" The officer shined his flashlight directly into Marcus's face. The bright light was blinding and uncomfortable. Marcus squinted but tried to remain calm. He could feel the officer studying his face, taking in his features, making judgments based on what he saw. What Marcus didn't know was that this officer's name was Jake Morrison, and that Morrison had a reputation in the local police department. Other officers whispered about Morrison's aggressive tactics and his tendency to make unnecessary stops in certain neighborhoods. What Marcus also didn't know was that the next few minutes would change both of their lives forever. Officer Jake Morrison stood beside Marcus's car, his flashlight still pointed directly at Marcus's face. The bright light made it hard for Marcus to see, but he could feel the officer's hostile energy. Morrison was a 15-year veteran of the Riverside Police Department. He was known among his fellow officers for being tough, but some whispered that he was too aggressive, especially during certain types of stops. "License and registration," Morrison demanded in a harsh voice. His tone was not professional or polite. It was the voice of someone who had already decided this was going to be a difficult encounter. Marcus kept his hands on the steering wheel. "Yes, sir, I'm going to reach for my wallet now. It's in my jacket pocket." Marcus spoke slowly and clearly. He had learned that announcing every movement was important during police stops. His father had taught him this lesson, and unfortunately, Marcus had to use it many times over the years. Morrison watched as Marcus carefully reached into his jacket. Marcus moved very slowly, making sure the officer could see exactly what he was doing. When Marcus pulled out his wallet, Morrison's eyes narrowed. Something about the way Marcus spoke and moved made Morrison angry. He didn't like when people seemed too calm or too educated during traffic stops. Marcus opened his wallet and pulled out his driver's license. But he also pulled out something else, his FBI credentials. The gold badge and official identification card were clearly visible in the dim light. Marcus hoped that showing his FBI status would end this situation quickly and peacefully. "Here's my driver's license, officer," Marcus said respectfully. "And these are my FBI credentials. I'm Regional Director Marcus Williams." Morrison took the documents and shined his flashlight on them. When he saw the FBI badge and identification, his expression changed. But instead of becoming more respectful, Morrison became more angry. His face turned red and his jaw clenched tightly. "These are fake," Morrison said loudly. "You think I'm stupid? You think you can fool me with fake FBI credentials?" Marcus was shocked. In all his years as an FBI agent, no police officer had ever questioned his credentials. "Officer, I assure you those are real. You can call the FBI field office to verify my identity. The number is on the card." Morrison's anger grew stronger. He had always resented federal agents. They thought they were better than local cops. They came into his city and acted like they owned the place, and now here was this black man trying to pretend he was some big-shot FBI director. Morrison wasn't going to let this happen. "Get out of the car," Morrison ordered. His hand moved to his service weapon. "Get out now." Marcus felt his heart rate increase. This was not going the way he had hoped. The officer clearly didn't believe his credentials were real, and the situation was getting more dangerous. Marcus had investigated many cases where police encounters went wrong. He knew that arguing or refusing to comply could make things much worse. "Officer, I'm going to step out of the car slowly," Marcus said. He opened his door carefully and got out, keeping his hands visible at all times. "My credentials are real. Please call your supervisor. This is all a misunderstanding." Morrison stepped closer to Marcus. The officer was shorter than Marcus but had a stocky, muscular build. His eyes were filled with anger and something else: hatred. Morrison had grown up in a family that taught him to distrust and dislike African Americans. Years of police work had only made these feelings stronger. "You people think you're so smart," Morrison said, his voice getting louder. "Coming into our neighborhood with your fancy cars and fake badges. You think you can fool me?" Marcus realized that this was about more than just questioning his credentials. This officer had a problem with his race. Marcus had faced racism throughout his career, but usually it was more subtle. This was raw, open hatred. "Officer Morrison," Marcus said, reading the name tag on the officer's uniform. "I understand you're doing your job, but I really am an FBI director. Please call your supervisor or the FBI field office. They can confirm who I am." Morrison laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was cold and mean. "FBI director? You? That's the funniest thing I've heard all day. You probably stole that car too. Where did you really get it? Did you steal it from some white family?" The racist comments hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. He had worked his entire career to earn respect and authority. He had solved major cases, saved lives, and served his country with honor. But to this officer, none of that mattered. All Morrison saw was the color of his skin. By now, other cars were starting to notice what was happening. A few vehicles slowed down as they passed. Some drivers pulled over to the side of the road. In today's world, many people had learned to record police encounters with their phones. Several people were now filming what was happening. Morrison noticed the gathering crowd and became even more aggressive. He felt like he was losing control of the situation. In his mind, he needed to show everyone that he was in charge. He couldn't let this black man make him look weak or foolish. "Turn around and put your hands on the car," Morrison commanded. His voice was shaking with anger now. "I'm going to search you for weapons." Marcus knew he had to comply, but he also knew this was wrong. He was a federal law enforcement officer being treated like a criminal. "Officer, I am armed. I have a service weapon because I'm an FBI agent. I have a permit to carry. I'm going to tell you where it is so there's no surprise." Morrison's eyes went wide when he heard that Marcus was armed. Fear mixed with his anger and racism. In Morrison's twisted mind, this confirmed his suspicions. He was convinced that Marcus was a dangerous criminal pretending to be an FBI agent. "Don't move!" Morrison shouted. He drew his service weapon and pointed it directly at Marcus's back. "Don't you dare reach for anything!" Marcus felt the cold barrel of the gun against his back. He had been in dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This felt like his life was truly in danger. He could hear people in the crowd gasping and shouting. Some were yelling at Morrison to put his gun away. Others were calling 911 on their phones. "Officer, please don't do this," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through his body. "I'm not reaching for anything. My hands are on the car. Please call your supervisor." But Morrison was beyond reasoning now. Years of prejudice and hatred had built up inside him. He was convinced that Marcus was lying about being an FBI agent. He was convinced that Marcus was a threat, and he was convinced that he needed to take action before something terrible happened. The crowd continued to grow. More people were recording, with their phones. Some were shouting for Morrison to stop. Others were calling for help. The quiet suburban street had become the scene of a confrontation that would soon change many lives forever. Marcus could feel the tension in the air. He knew that one wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, could end his life. He thought about his wife Sarah and his children Tommy and Lisa. He thought about all the cases he still needed to solve and all the good he still wanted to do in the world. The situation was spiraling out of control, and Marcus knew that the next few moments would determine whether he would make it home to his family that night. Officer Morrison's hand shook slightly as he held his gun pointed at Marcus's back. The weapon was loaded and ready to fire. Morrison's finger rested on the trigger, and his breathing was fast and shallow. The hatred in his eyes was clear to everyone watching. The crowd of people recording with their phones had grown larger. Some were shouting for Morrison to put his gun away. Marcus could feel the cold metal of the gun barrel pressing against his back through his jacket. He had been in dangerous situations before during his FBI career, but this felt different. This time he was completely helpless. He couldn't reach for his own weapon. He couldn't call for backup. He was at the mercy of an officer who clearly had no intention of showing any mercy. "Please, officer," Marcus said in a calm voice, even though his heart was racing. "I'm not moving. My hands are on the car. You can see I'm not a threat. Please call your supervisor to verify who I am." Morrison laughed, but it was a cruel sound. "Supervisor? You think I need permission to deal with criminals like you? You think your fake badge is going to save you?" The racist language was getting worse. Morrison was using words that made the crowd gasp in shock. Some people were crying as they watched what was happening. Others were calling 911, begging for help to arrive quickly, but help seemed far away, and the situation was getting more dangerous by the second. "You people are all the same," Morrison continued, his voice filled with venom. "You think you can come into our neighborhoods and pretend to be something you're not. You think you can fool us with your lies and your fake credentials." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment and thought about his family. He pictured his wife Sarah waiting at home with his dinner. He thought about his son Tommy practicing basketball shots in their driveway. He thought about his daughter Lisa reading her favorite book before bed. Would he ever see them again? "Officer Morrison," Marcus said, using the name he had read on the officer's uniform. "I have a wife and 2 children. They're waiting for me at home. Please don't do something you'll regret for the rest of your life." But Morrison was beyond listening to reason. 20 years of anger and prejudice had built up inside him. He had always believed that black people were criminals, even when they claimed to be law-abiding citizens. In his twisted mind, Marcus was just another thug trying to trick him. "Turn around slowly," Morrison commanded. "I want to see your face when I arrest you for impersonating a federal officer." Marcus knew this was a critical moment. If he turned around, Morrison might see it as a threatening move. If he didn't turn around, Morrison might think he was being disobedient. Either way, the situation could end badly. "I'm going to turn around very slowly," Marcus announced. "My hands will remain visible at all times." As Marcus began to turn around, Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger. The officer was convinced that Marcus was about to make a sudden move or reach for a weapon. Morrison had convinced himself that he was about to be attacked by a dangerous criminal. The crowd watched in horror as the situation reached its breaking point. People were screaming for Morrison to stop. Some were calling for other police officers to intervene. But Morrison seemed to be in his own world, unable to hear anything except the sound of his own anger and fear. Marcus was now facing Morrison, directly. He could see the hatred in the officer's eyes. He could see the gun pointed at his chest. He could see Morrison's finger on the trigger, ready to fire. This was the moment that would determine whether he lived or died. "Officer, please," Marcus said one last time. "I'm FBI Regional Director Marcus Williams. You can verify this with one phone call. Please don't make a mistake that will destroy both of our lives." Morrison's face twisted with rage. "Shut up, stop lying, I know what you really are." The crowd was now shouting loudly. People were begging Morrison to put his gun away. Some were threatening to call the mayor or the governor. Others were live streaming the encounter on social media. and the video was already being shared thousands of times. But Morrison couldn't hear any of it. His world had narrowed down to just him and Marcus. In his mind, this was a battle between good and evil, between law and order and criminal behavior. He was convinced that he was the hero in this story. Marcus could see that Morrison was reaching his breaking point. The officer's hand was shaking more now. His breathing was erratic. His eyes were wild with anger and fear. Marcus knew that he had only seconds before Morrison would pull the trigger. In that moment, Marcus made a decision that would save his life. He had been trained at the FBI Academy in hand-to-hand combat and disarming techniques. He had practiced these moves hundreds of times during his career, but he had never had to use them in a situation like this. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus prepared to act. He could hear his own heartbeat. He could see every detail of Morrison's face. He could feel the eyes of the crowd watching him. Everything depended on what happened in the next few seconds. Morrison's finger began to squeeze the trigger. He had made his decision. He was going to shoot Marcus and claim that he had been defending himself against a dangerous criminal with fake credentials. In Morrison's mind, no one would question the word of a police officer over a dead black man. But Marcus was ready. Years of training had prepared him for this moment. As Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger, Marcus moved with lightning speed. He spun to his left, grabbing Morrison's wrist with both hands. The gun fired, but the bullet went harmlessly, into the air instead of into Marcus's chest. The crowd screamed as they heard the gunshot. Some people dove for cover behind cars. Others continued recording, knowing that this footage would be important evidence of what had really happened. Marcus twisted Morrison's wrist, using a technique he had learned in FBI training. Morrison cried out in pain and dropped his weapon. The gun clattered across the pavement out of reach of both men. For a moment, the two men struggled. Morrison was strong, but Marcus was trained in combat techniques. Within seconds, Marcus had Morrison on the ground, his knee pressed against the officer's back, his hands controlling Morrison's arms. "I am FBI Regional Director Marcus Williams," Marcus said loudly so everyone could hear. "This officer just tried to kill me. I am placing him under arrest for attempted murder and civil rights violations." The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Justice had been served, and it had been served by the very man who had been targeted for nothing more than the color of his skin. Officer Morrison lay face down on the cold pavement, his arms twisted behind his back. Marcus held him down with one knee pressed firmly against Morrison's spine. The racist cop who had been pointing a gun at Marcus just moments before was now completely helpless. Morrison's police radio crackled on his belt, and Marcus could hear other officers being dispatched to different calls around the city. The crowd of witnesses stood in shocked silence for a moment. They had just watched an FBI director defend himself against a police officer who had tried to kill him. Cell phone cameras continued recording everything. The videos were already being uploaded to social media, where they would soon be seen by millions of people around the world. Marcus reached for Morrison's radio with his free hand. He pressed the button and spoke in a clear, authoritative voice. "This is FBI Regional Director Marcus Williams. I need immediate backup at the intersection of Maple and Oak Street. I have a police officer in custody for attempted murder and civil rights violations." The police dispatcher was confused. "Sir, can you repeat that? Did you say you're FBI?" "Yes, this is Director Marcus Williams, FBI Chicago Regional Office, badge number 2847. I need supervisors and federal agents at this location immediately. An officer just fired his weapon at me during an unlawful traffic stop." Morrison struggled beneath Marcus's knee, but he was held firmly in place. "Get off me!" Morrison shouted. "You're assaulting a police officer. I'll have you arrested." Marcus looked down at Morrison with a mixture of anger and sadness. "Officer Morrison, you are under arrest for attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, and violation of my civil rights under federal law. You have the right to remain silent." The crowd began to cheer and clap. Many people had tears in their eyes. They had just witnessed something incredible: a black man defending himself against a racist police officer and living to tell about it. In a world where so many similar encounters ended in tragedy, this felt like a miracle. An elderly white woman from the crowd walked over to Marcus. "Sir, I recorded everything on my phone," she said. "That officer was completely out of line. He was saying terrible things to you. I'm so sorry this happened, but I'm glad you're safe." Marcus nodded gratefully. "Thank you, ma'am. Your video will be important evidence. Please don't delete it." Within minutes, the sound of sirens filled the quiet neighborhood. Red and blue lights flashed from multiple directions as police cars and FBI vehicles rushed to the scene. The first to arrive was a Riverside Police Department supervisor, Lieutenant Johnson. He got out of his car and looked at the scene in disbelief. "What the hell is going on here?" Lieutenant Johnson asked. He saw Morrison on the ground and Marcus holding him down. Johnson didn't recognize Marcus, so he assumed Marcus was the suspect. "Sir, step away from the officer immediately," Johnson commanded, reaching for his weapon. Marcus looked up calmly. "Lieutenant, I'm FBI Regional Director Marcus Williams. Your officer just tried to kill me during a traffic stop. I have witnesses and video evidence. Please secure the scene while we wait for federal agents to arrive." Johnson hesitated. He had never seen anything like this before. Morrison was one of his officers, but this man claiming to be FBI seemed completely calm and professional. Johnson looked around and saw dozens of people with phones all recording everything. "Can you show me some identification?" Johnson asked. Marcus carefully reached into his jacket pocket while keeping Morrison pinned down. He pulled out his FBI credentials and tossed them to Johnson. The lieutenant examined the badge and ID card under his flashlight. Johnson's face went pale when he realized Marcus was telling the truth. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Morrison, what did you do?" More police cars arrived, followed by 2 black SUVs with federal government plates. FBI agents jumped out of the vehicles and quickly took control of the scene. Agent Sarah Chen, Marcus's deputy director, ran over to where Marcus was holding Morrison. "Marcus, are you okay?" Agent Chen asked. "We got your radio call and came, as fast as we could." Marcus finally stood up, allowing other agents to take custody of Morrison. "I'm fine, Sarah, but this officer just tried to murder me. He fired his weapon at me during what should have been a routine traffic stop." "Agent," Chen looked down at Morrison, who was now being handcuffed by federal agents. "Officer, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. You attempted to kill a federal law enforcement officer." Morrison's face was red with anger and embarrassment. "He's lying. He attacked me. I was just doing my job." Lieutenant Johnson stepped forward. "Morrison, shut up. Don't say another word without a lawyer." The scene was now controlled by federal agents. They set up a perimeter and began interviewing witnesses. The crowd of people who had recorded the encounter were eager to tell their stories. Everyone had seen the same thing: a racist police officer who had tried to kill an innocent man. Agent Chen walked over to Marcus. "The media is already here," she said, pointing to news vans arriving on the street. "This is going to be a big story." Marcus looked at the growing crowd of reporters and camera crews. He knew that his life was about to change forever. This incident would be investigated by the FBI, the Department of Justice, and probably Congress. Morrison would face federal charges, and the entire Riverside Police Department would be under scrutiny. Detective Williams, a senior investigator from the police department, approached Marcus. "Director Williams, I need to apologize on behalf of our department. Officer Morrison's actions do not represent who we are or what we stand for." Marcus nodded. "Detective, I understand that most police officers are good people trying to do their job. But what happened here tonight cannot be ignored or covered up. Officer Morrison needs to face the full consequences of his actions." Morrison was loaded into the back of an FBI vehicle. As the car drove away, he stared out the window at the crowd of people who had witnessed his downfall. In the span of just a few minutes, his career was over, his reputation was destroyed, and his life was changed forever. Marcus walked over to his car to inspect it for damage. The vehicle was fine, but he noticed Morrison's gun still lying on the pavement where it had fallen during their struggle. An FBI evidence technician carefully picked up the weapon and placed it in an evidence bag. "Marcus," Agent Chen said, "you should go to the hospital to get checked out." And then you need to call Sarah and tell her what happened before she sees it on the news. Marcus realized she was right. His wife and children would be worried sick when they learned about this incident. He pulled out his phone to call home, knowing that this was a conversation he had hoped he would never have to have. The quiet suburban street was now filled with police cars, FBI vehicles, news trucks, and dozens of people. What had started as a routine drive home had become a national news story that would be talked about for years to come. 3 months after that terrifying night on Maple Street, Officer Jake Morrison sat in a federal courtroom wearing an orange prison jumpsuit. His hands were cuffed, and his head was down. The man who had once carried a badge and gun was now facing the consequences of his hatred and racism. The judge, a stern African-American woman named Judge Patricia Williams, looked down at Morrison with disgust. "Officer Morrison," Judge Williams said, "you have been found guilty on all charges: attempted murder of a federal officer, civil rights violations, and assault with a deadly weapon. These are serious crimes that strike at the heart of justice in America." Morrison's lawyer had tried to defend him, claiming that he was just doing his job and felt threatened, but the evidence was overwhelming. The cell phone videos from that night had been played in court dozens of times. Every person who witnessed the event had testified against Morrison. Even some of his fellow police officers had spoken against him. FBI Director Marcus Williams sat in the front row of the courtroom with his wife Sarah and their 2 children, Tommy and Lisa. They had all been through a difficult few months. The media attention had been intense. Reporters had camped outside their house for weeks. Tommy had been teased at school by some kids whose parents believed Morrison's lies. Lisa had nightmares about losing her father. But there had also been positive changes. Marcus had received thousands of letters from people around the world supporting him. Police departments across the country had invited him to speak about racial bias and proper law enforcement procedures. He had become a symbol of courage and professionalism in the face of hatred. Judge Williams continued speaking to Morrison. "Your actions that night were not those of a police officer. They were the actions of a criminal motivated by racial hatred. You tried to murder an innocent man because of the color of his skin." Morrison finally looked up at the judge. His eyes were red from crying. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His family had abandoned him. Even his fellow officers wanted nothing to do with him. "I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison," Judge Williams announced. "You will also pay financial damages to Director Williams and his family. When you are released, you will never be allowed to work in law enforcement again." The courtroom erupted in applause. Marcus felt a sense of relief wash over him. Justice had been served. Morrison would pay for his crimes, and hopefully, other officers would learn from this case. After the court hearing, Marcus and his family walked outside to face a crowd of reporters. Camera crews from every major news network were there. Marcus had given many interviews over the past few months, but this one felt different. This was the end of the legal process. "Director Williams," a reporter shouted. "How do you feel about the sentence?" Marcus stepped up to the microphones. "I feel that justice has been served today. Officer Morrison's actions were criminal and had nothing to do with proper law enforcement. I hope this case sends a message that racism and hatred will not be tolerated in our police departments." Another reporter asked, "What changes have you seen since this incident?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I've been encouraged by the response from law enforcement agencies across the country. Many departments have implemented new training programs focused on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. The Riverside Police Department has undergone major reforms." This was true. Chief Robert Martinez of the Riverside Police Department had fired 3 other officers who had histories of problematic behavior. The department now required all officers to undergo monthly bias training. They had also hired more minority officers and created a civilian oversight board. "The most important change," Marcus continued, "is that people are talking about these issues. We can't solve problems that we don't acknowledge exist." Marcus's son Tommy, now 17, had been changed by the experience too. He had started a club at his high school to promote understanding between different racial groups. He often spoke to younger students about the importance of treating everyone with respect. Lisa, now 15, had written an essay about her father's experience that won a national contest. She planned to become a lawyer so she could fight for civil rights like her father did. Sarah Williams had also been affected by the incident. She had quit her job as a teacher to work full-time with organizations that supported families of police violence victims. She traveled around the country speaking about the impact of racism on families. The cell phone videos from that night had been viewed over 50 million times on social media. They were now used in police training academies across the country as an example of what not to do during traffic stops. Many young officers had told Marcus that watching those videos had changed how they approached their jobs. Dr. Angela Davis, a professor who studied police behavior, had written a book about the case. The Marcus Williams incident, she wrote, showed America what can happen when a well-trained professional faces racism, but it also showed what can happen when ordinary citizens use their phones to record police encounters. The incident had led to new laws in several states. The Marcus Williams Act required all police officers to undergo annual bias training and mandated that police departments investigate any complaints about racial profiling. Morrison, meanwhile, had lost everything. His wife had divorced him and moved away with their children. His house had been sold to pay legal fees. He had received death threats from people who saw him as a symbol of racist policing. In prison, he was kept in protective custody because other inmates wanted to hurt him. But perhaps the most important change was in Marcus himself. He had always been dedicated to his job, but now he felt a deeper sense of purpose. He knew that he had survived something that many other black men had not survived. He felt responsible for using his experience to make things better for others. Marcus started a foundation that provided legal help to families affected by police violence. He wrote a book about his experience called 3 Minutes That Changed Everything. All the money from book sales went to organizations working for police reform. The foundation also created scholarships for young minority students who wanted to pursue careers in law enforcement. Marcus believed that having more diverse police departments would help prevent incidents like his from happening to others. On the first anniversary of the incident, Marcus returned to Maple Street. The city had installed a small memorial plaque at the intersection where everything happened. It read, "In memory of all victims of police violence and in hope of a more just future." Marcus stood at that spot with his family, thinking about how much had changed. The quiet suburban street looked the same, but America was different. People were talking about racism in new ways. Police departments were changing their training. Young officers were learning better ways to serve their communities. Most importantly, Marcus was still alive to tell his story. He was still able to hug his wife and children. He was still able to fight for justice and equality. The 3 minutes that Officer Morrison had spent on the ground that night had led to changes that would last for generations. As Marcus looked around the neighborhood where he had almost died, he felt hopeful about the future. There was still work to do, but progress was being made. Justice had prevailed, and that gave him hope that it would prevail again.